A simple black woman challenged to cook for a laugh, they regretted when she served her dish. The polished marble floors of Maison du Soleil gleamed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Loretta Jenkins moved her mop methodically across the surface, her movements nearly invisible to the bustling kitchen staff who rushed past her without a second glance. At 52, she'd perfected the art of blending into the background, a skill that made her an excellent janitor and an even better observer of human nature. The kitchen of the five-star hotel was in chaos this morning. Executive Chef Jacques Moreau paced the pristine workstations, his tall white hat bobbing with each animated gesture as he berated his staff. His French accent grew thicker with his rising frustration. Non. This is unacceptable. Jacques slammed his palm against the stainless steel counter. The béarnaise is separating. The reduction is burnt. The presentation is pedestrian. He spat the last word as though it were a personal insult. Loretta kept her eyes down, focusing on a particularly stubborn spot on the floor, but her ears caught every word. She'd been cleaning these kitchens for 7 years now, arriving before dawn and leaving long after the dinner service concluded. She knew the rhythms of this kitchen better than some of the sous chefs who rotated through every few months. This is what happens when you hire people without proper training, Jacques continued, his voice echoing across the kitchen. Culinary excellence requires discipline, technique, years at the finest academies. Not, whatever this is. He gestured dismissively at a sauce being prepared by a young sous chef named Marcus, whose hands trembled slightly as he tried to salvage his work. Loretta could see the problem from where she stood. The heat was too high, and the young man was stirring too vigorously. She'd seen this mistake 100 times before, watching through the years as various chefs worked their magic, or failed to. She knew exactly how to fix it. Marcus caught her eye, desperation written across his face. The head chef had moved on to terrorize another station, giving Marcus a brief moment of respite. Loretta sidled closer, pretending to mop near his workstation. Lower the heat and add a touch of cold butter, she whispered, barely moving her lips. Whisk gently, not so fast. Hope flickered across the young chef's face. He nodded almost imperceptibly and reached for the temperature control. What was that? Jacques' head snapped around, his keen ears catching the exchange. He stalked back to Marcus's station, eyes narrowing as he looked between the sous chef and the janitor. Did I just hear the cleaning lady giving cooking advice in my kitchen? The entire kitchen fell silent. Even the dishwashers paused their work to watch. Loretta straightened her back but kept her expression neutral. Just making conversation, chef. Jacques' thin lips curled into a mocking smile. Making conversation? About cuisine? In my 3-star kitchen? He laughed, a sharp, cutting sound that invited others to join in. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the staff. Tell me, Madam Janitor, which culinary academy did you attend? Le Cordon Bleu? The Culinary Institute of America? Loretta met his gaze steadily. No academy, chef. I learned from my grandmother. This elicited louder laughter from several of the line cooks, encouraged by Jacques' theatrical eye roll. Grandmother's cooking! How quaint! Jacques placed a hand dramatically over his heart. Perhaps we should throw away our curriculum and replace it with, how do you Americans say it? Soul food? He made air quotes with his fingers, his voice dripping with disdain. Marcus looked down at his feet, shame coloring his cheeks for having been caught taking advice from the cleaning staff. Loretta felt a flash of anger, not for herself, but for her grandmother's memory. Estelle Jenkins had been the finest cook in their neighborhood, feeding generations of families with food so good it brought tears to people's eyes. With all due respect, chef, Loretta said quietly, good food is good food, no matter who teaches you how to make it. The kitchen grew even quieter. No one spoke to Chef Jacques Moreau this way, especially not the cleaning staff. Jacques' face hardened, his amusement morphing into something colder. Is that so? You believe your grandmother's cooking compares to the techniques I've spent decades perfecting? He stepped closer to Loretta, looking down his aquiline nose at her. Perhaps you think you could do my job then? Loretta shook her head. I didn't say that, chef. I just... No, this is fascinating. Jock interrupted, his voice rising theatrically once more. We have in our midst a hidden culinary genius, mopping our floors. He turned to address the entire kitchen. Perhaps we should all throw away our certifications. Fire the whole brigade and replace them with the maintenance staff. More nervous laughter followed, but there was an undercurrent of discomfort now. Several of the staff looked embarrassed at the public humiliation of a woman who had always been kind to them, who cleaned up their messes without complaint, who sometimes brought homemade cookies that disappeared within minutes. Loretta gripped her mop handle tighter and turned to resume her work, dignity intact but pride wounded. Wait, Jock called out, a dangerous gleam in his eye. I have a proposition. Loretta paused, not turning around. We have an important guest coming tomorrow evening. A VIP who requested our finest cuisine served in the private dining room. Jock folded his arms across his chest. I challenge you to cook for this guest. Gasps echoed throughout the kitchen. Jock never let anyone else cook for VIPs. Loretta slowly turned back to face him. I'm not a chef here, Mr. Moreau. No, you're not, he agreed with a smirk. But you seem to think you know better than my trained staff. So prove it. His voice hardened. Unless you're afraid your grandmother's recipes won't measure up to fine dining standards. The mention of her grandmother again made something shift in Loretta's expression. She remained silent, weighing the challenge. Jacques, sensing vulnerability, pressed his advantage. In fact, let's make it interesting. I'll bet my position on it. A collective intake of breath swept through the kitchen. Jacques, his sous chef, Laurent, warned in a low voice. The directors won't approve. If your dish impresses our guests more than mine, Jacques continued, ignoring the warning, I'll resign as executive chef. His confident smile said he considered this outcome impossible. But when you fail, and you will fail, you'll submit your resignation as well. His eyes glittered with malice. No more janitorial position for you at Maison du Soleil or any affiliated hotel in our chain. The stakes were enormous. Loretta was a widow supporting herself on this salary, with limited options at her age. But Jacques had calculated correctly. Her pride, especially when it came to her grandmother's legacy, ran deep. You'll sabotage me, Loretta said simply. Jacques placed a hand over his heart in mock offense. I am a professional. You'll have access to the kitchen. He paused, then added with a smirk. For 2 hours before service. The pantry will be stocked with standard ingredients. Anything exotic you might need, you'll have to source yourself. Loretta knew the impossible situation being crafted for her. Limited time, limited ingredients, in an unfamiliar professional setting, cooking for a VIP with expectations of fine dining excellence. It was designed for her to fail spectacularly. The entire kitchen watched, breaths held, as Loretta considered the challenge. Jacques' face showed the smug satisfaction of a man who knew he'd already won. Well? He prompted. Loretta thought of her grandmother's weathered hands guiding hers over a bubbling pot, the secret techniques passed down through generations, the recipes that had nourished bodies and souls through hardship and celebration alike. I accept, she said quietly. Jacques didn't bother to hide his triumph. Excellent! Tomorrow evening then. Our VIP arrives at 7. He turned back to his staff. Now everyone back to work. We have actual cuisine to prepare. As the kitchen staff reluctantly returned to their stations, Loretta resumed her mopping, her movements as steady and dignified as before. But inside, her mind was already whirling with possibilities, ingredients, and the memory of her grandmother whispering in her ear. Food made without love ain't worth eating, child. And love can turn the simplest dish into something magical. She would need all the magic she could summon to survive this challenge. But unlike Jacques, Loretta knew that true culinary magic had nothing to do with prestigious schools or fancy techniques. It lived in the hands that prepared the food and the heart that guided them. Loretta's apartment on the east side of town was nothing like the gleaming luxury of Maison du Soleil. The 2-bedroom walk-up on the 3rd floor had creaky floorboards, aging wallpaper, and windows that rattled when the wind blew strong. But it was home, kept immaculately clean with the same care she brought to her work. Tonight, though, cleanliness was the last thing on her mind as she unlocked her door and switched on the lights. With Jacques' challenge echoing in her ears, she made a beeline for the hallway closet, pulling out a stepladder that had seen better days. Positioning it beneath the attic hatch, she climbed up and pushed the wooden panel aside. The smell of old paper and cardboard greeted her as she hoisted herself into the small storage space. Her hands found the chain for the single bare bulb, and light flooded the cramped attic. Dust motes danced in the yellow glow as she crawled toward a collection of boxes marked "Grandma" in faded marker. "Where are you?" she murmured, opening the first box and then another. "There!" She pulled out a weathered leather-bound book, its spine cracked from decades of use. Estelle Jenkins' cookbook, not published, but handwritten, page after page of recipes annotated with notes, adjustments, and memories. Beside it lay a stack of yellowed recipe cards, held together with a fraying ribbon. Loretta gathered these treasures and continued her search, finding a small wooden box that contained her grandmother's special spice blends, preserved all these years. Some of the jars were nearly empty, used sparingly for special occasions, but there was enough. There had to be. Back in her living room, Loretta spread everything across her coffee table. She flipped through the cookbook, her fingers tracing her grandmother's elegant script. Memories flooded back with each page turn. Sunday dinners after church, neighborhood block parties where Estelle's table always had the longest line, late nights learning to perfect a roux while her grandmother supervised from her rocking chair. Her eye caught a faded photograph tucked between the pages. Loretta, no more than 10 years old, stood proudly beside a makeshift grill at the annual neighborhood cookout. Next to her was a skinny boy with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile, Danny Bernard from 3 doors down. They'd been unlikely friends, she shy and serious, he boisterous and popular, but they'd bonded over their love of food. "What happened to you, Danny?" she wondered aloud, studying the boy's face. Their families had lost touch after his parents moved across town seeking better opportunities. She'd heard he'd gone to college on a scholarship, but nothing more after that. Shaking off the nostalgia, Loretta focused on the task at hand. What dish could possibly stand up to Jacques-trained techniques and fancy presentation? What could showcase her heritage while impressing a VIP with expectations of fine dining? The answer lay somewhere in these pages. Her fingers stopped at a recipe titled "Grandma's Sunday Oxtail." The margins were filled with notes. "Let it simmer longer. Add more time when using city water. The secret is in the browning. Don't rush." "That's it," Loretta whispered. The dish was humble in origin but complex in flavor, requiring patience and intuition that couldn't be taught in any culinary school. Loretta glanced at her watch. Nearly midnight, but there was no time to waste. She needed ingredients, not the mass-produced items found in supermarkets, but specific, quality components that would elevate her grandmother's recipe. Despite the late hour, she changed clothes and headed out. In a city that never truly slept, she knew where to go. Mr. Wilson's butcher shop in the old neighborhood stayed open late for restaurant orders. His daughter, who now ran the shop, recognized Loretta immediately. "Mrs. Jenkins! It's been ages," she greeted warmly. "What brings you out this time of night? I need the best oxtails you have, Shanice. The meatiest ones, cut just right." Something in Loretta's tone must have conveyed the importance, because Shanice didn't ask questions. She disappeared into the back and returned with precisely what Loretta needed, wrapped in butcher paper. "On the house," she insisted when Loretta reached for her wallet. "Mama would have my hide if I charged Estelle Jenkins' daughter." From there, Loretta visited a night market where Caribbean and African vendors sold specialty produce. She selected collard greens with leaves so fresh they squeaked when rubbed together, herbs picked that morning, and heirloom tomatoes that smelled of sunshine. An elderly West Indian woman sold her homemade hot pepper sauce from a small stall, the secret recipe guarded for generations, just like Estelle's. "You cooking something special?" the woman asked, noting Loretta's careful selections. "Something to make my grandmother proud," Loretta replied. The woman nodded knowingly and slipped an extra jar of pepper sauce into Loretta's bag. "On the house. For your grandmother's spirit." By the time Loretta returned home, her arms laden with treasures, it was nearly 3 a.m. She should have been exhausted, but adrenaline and determination kept her wide awake. She spread her ingredients across her small kitchen counter and began preparations that couldn't wait until tomorrow. The oxtails needed to marinate overnight. As she worked, rubbing each piece with a blend of spices, browning them with practiced patience before adding them to a mixture of herbs and aromatics, Loretta felt her grandmother's presence beside her. She could almost hear Estelle's voice. "That's right, baby. Cook from your heart. That's where the real flavor comes from." Outside her window, the city lights twinkled as dawn approached. Loretta finally settled into her armchair, her preparations complete for now. The remaining work would happen tomorrow in the hotel kitchen, where Jacques Moreau thought he was setting her up to fail. He expected a simple black woman with no formal training to crumble under pressure. What he didn't understand was that pressure was nothing new to Loretta. She'd raised a son alone after her husband died, worked 3 jobs to put that boy through college, and faced down hardships that would make a fancy chef's bad day look like a vacation. As sleep finally claimed her, Loretta's last conscious thought was of her grandmother's favorite saying. "They might not respect your beginnings, but they sure gonna respect what you can do." Tomorrow, Jacques Moreau would learn exactly what Loretta Jenkins could do. The private dining room at Maison du Soleil was an intimate sanctuary of luxury. Soft lighting from crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the single table draped in pristine white linen. Silver gleamed beside fine china, and fresh flowers perfumed the air with subtle fragrance. Mr. Bernard sat alone at the table, his back to the door. All Loretta and Jacques could see from the small service window was the back of his head, dark hair peppered with distinguished silver, and his broad shoulders beneath an impeccably tailored suit. "Gentlemen," he addressed the 2 servers who approached with the dishes, not bothering to turn around. "Place them both before me without telling me which is which. I prefer to judge without preconceptions." The servers complied, setting the 2 plates side by side. From their vantage point, Loretta and Jacques watched in tense silence. Jacques' creation was a visual masterpiece, foie gras sculpted into a perfect rose, drizzled with truffle-infused reduction, surrounded by precisely placed microgreens and dots of puree in alternating colors. Gold leaf glittered atop the arrangement. It was cuisine as high art, designed to impress before the first bite. Beside it, Loretta's dish seemed almost humble in comparison. No architectural feats or decorative flourishes, just food prepared with care and arranged to highlight its natural beauty. The oxtail glistened with rich sauce, the cornbread dumplings golden brown and tender, the collard greens vibrant against the earthy tones of the meat. Mr. Bernard studied both plates for a long moment. He reached for his napkin, unfolded it with deliberate movements, and placed it across his lap. Then he picked up his fork and knife. "He'll go for mine first," Jacques whispered with confidence. "The presentation alone." But Mr. Bernard turned to Loretta's dish first, cutting into the oxtail with delicate precision. He lifted a perfect bite combining meat, sauce, and a corner of dumpling to his lips. His shoulders remained perfectly still as he chewed, betraying nothing of his reaction. Jacques' smirk never faltered. "First impressions can be deceiving. The complexity of my dish will." "Shh!" Loretta hushed him, eyes fixed on the diner. Mr. Bernard took a second bite of her dish, this time including the greens. Then a third. His water glass remained untouched, a good sign, Loretta knew. When food was truly balanced, diners rarely needed to cleanse their palates between bites. Finally, he turned to Jacques' creation. He studied it a moment longer, almost hesitantly dismantling the artistic presentation with his fork. He sampled the foie gras, then the accompanying elements, his movements methodical but lacking the engagement he'd shown with Loretta's food. After several minutes of alternating between both dishes, Mr. Bernard finally set down his utensils and raised his hand, signaling for the chefs. "This is it." Jacques straightened his uniform, confidence radiating from him like heat. "When you're ready to concede, Just nod and I'll do the talking. No need to embarrass yourself further. Loretta didn't respond as they entered the private dining room together. She kept her head high, hands clasped behind her back in the same posture Jacques had adopted. The dining room felt impossibly large as they approached the table, their footsteps muffled by thick carpet. "Gentlemen," the maitre d' announced. "Executive Chef Jacques Moreau and guest chef Loretta Jenkins." Mr. Bernard didn't turn immediately. He dabbed his mouth with his napkin, set it aside with careful precision, then slowly rose and faced them. The moment he turned, Loretta's breath caught in her throat. The distinguished man before her was unmistakably Daniel Bernard, Danny from down the block, the gap-toothed boy from her childhood photograph, now transformed by time into a man of evident success and refinement. His eyes, however, remained the same, bright with intelligence and warmth. Those eyes widened in shock as they landed on Loretta's face. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak, his professional composure cracking. "Loretta?" he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Loretta Jenkins?" Jacques looked between them in confusion. "You know each other?" Daniel Bernard recovered quickly, though his eyes never left Loretta's face. "We grew up in the same neighborhood many years ago." A smile spread across his features, no longer the gap-toothed grin of a boy but still achingly familiar. "Loretta's grandmother taught half the neighborhood how to appreciate real food." Jacques' expression soured. "Mr. Bernard, I assure you this coincidence has no bearing on." "On the contrary," Daniel interrupted smoothly. "It has every bearing." He gestured to the plates before him. "I requested this private dining experience because I am not merely a VIP guest, but a food critic for Culinary Elite magazine." The color drained from Jacques' face. Culinary Elite was the most influential culinary publication in the country, capable of making or breaking a restaurant's reputation with a single review. "I've dined at Maison du Soleil several times anonymously," Daniel continued. "While the technical execution has always been flawless, I've found the cuisine lacks soul." He turned back to Loretta, genuine emotion showing in his expression. "Until today." Loretta stood speechless, still processing the double shock, that this VIP was Danny from her childhood, and that he was a renowned food critic. "These oxtails," Daniel continued, indicating Loretta's dish, "transported me instantly to your grandmother's kitchen. I haven't tasted food with this depth of flavor and authenticity in years of professional dining." He shook his head in wonder. "The technique is flawless, but more importantly, there's heart in every bite." Jacques stepped forward. "Mr. Bernard, with all due respect, your personal connection to Ms. Jenkins is clearly influencing your judgment. My dish represents the pinnacle of modern French cuisine. Your dish," Daniel cut in, his tone cooling considerably, "represents everything that's become stagnant in high-end dining. Technical perfection without innovation. Expensive ingredients arranged for visual impact rather than harmony of flavor." He gestured toward Jacques' plate. "The foie gras is overcooked, the truffle oil overpowers rather than complements, and the gold leaf is, well, edible metal has never improved a dish's flavor." Jacques' face flushed deep red. "This is outrageous. You cannot possibly." "I've eaten at every 3-star Michelin restaurant in Europe," Daniel stated calmly. "I know the difference between impressive and exceptional." He turned to Loretta. "And this, Ms. Jenkins, is exceptional. I'd like to feature you and this dish in next month's issue." Loretta finally found her voice. "Me? In a magazine?" "A feature article," Daniel confirmed. "Your grandmother's legacy deserves recognition, and the culinary world needs this reminder of what food should be about." He smiled again, traces of the neighborhood boy shining through his polished exterior. "We have a lot of catching up to do, but first," he turned back to Jacques. "I believe you had a wager regarding this challenge?" Jacques' confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by poorly concealed panic. "That was merely motivational rhetoric. Not an actual." "You bet your job," Loretta spoke up, her quiet voice cutting through his excuses. "In front of your entire kitchen staff." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Did you indeed, Chef Moreau? Jacques swallowed hard, looking between the food critic and Loretta, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. I may have spoken impulsively. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Impulsive wagers aside, I'll be writing about my dining experience today. Both dishes. He let the implication hang in the air. A negative review from him could end more than just Jacques' position at this hotel. The executive chef's shoulders slumped in defeat. A man who suddenly realized he had gambled everything on the wrong hand and lost spectacularly. For Loretta, the reality of what had just happened was still sinking in. Her simple dish, born from generations of love and tradition, had not only stood up to fine dining scrutiny but triumphed. And somehow, across decades and social divides, it had reconnected her with a boy who once stood beside her at a neighborhood cookout, both of them dreaming of futures they couldn't yet imagine. A masterpiece. Daniel Bernard's words hung in the air of the private dining room, resonating with the weight of authority that came with his position at culinary elite. This isn't merely good food, it's transformative cuisine that honors tradition while standing confidently in the present. Jacques Moreau's face cycled through emotions like a roulette wheel: shock, anger, disbelief, and finally desperation. His immaculate chef's coat suddenly seemed too tight around his neck as he tugged at his collar. "Mr. Bernard," he began, attempting to salvage what remained of his dignity. "While I respect your personal connection to Ms. Jenkins, I must emphasize that one emotional response to a comfort food shouldn't overshadow years of classical training in. This isn't about emotion." Daniel cut him off firmly. "This is about excellence." He gestured toward Loretta's plate. "The technical execution here is flawless. The braising technique is perfect, the meat retains integrity while remaining tender. The balance of acid, salt, and heat demonstrates sophisticated understanding of flavor development. The sauce reduction shows patience and precision." Jacques' mouth opened and closed without sound. "But beyond technique," Daniel continued, "this dish does what truly exceptional food must do. It tells a story. It connects chef to diner in a dialogue about heritage, place, and meaning." He looked directly at Loretta. "I'd like to feature you prominently in our next issue, Hidden Culinary Genius Discovered in Hotel Kitchen." The headline practically writes itself. Loretta, still processing the whirlwind of events, managed a small smile. "My grandmother would have been proud. Estelle Jenkins deserved her own restaurant." Daniel agreed warmly. "I still remember those Sunday suppers. Half the neighborhood would find an excuse to stop by." Jacques, who had been momentarily forgotten, seized the opening to regain control of the situation. He cleared his throat loudly. "While this is all very touching, I feel compelled to point out that our little challenge was merely a kitchen amusement, not an official hotel matter." Daniel's expression cooled as he turned back to the executive chef. "An amusement? You publicly wagered your position against a woman's livelihood for an amusement?" Several silent seconds ticked by before Jacques attempted a different approach. "What I mean to say is, Ms. Jenkins lacks the professional certification required for an executive position. The hotel has standards. The hotel has a reputation to maintain." Daniel corrected, his voice now carrying the edge that had made chefs throughout the culinary world fear his reviews. "A reputation that would benefit significantly from featuring a chef capable of creating this level of cuisine." The dining room door opened, and Laurent, the senior sous chef, entered with the maitre d' and a tall woman in an expensive suit, Miranda Holloway, the hotel's general manager. Her expression was professionally neutral, but her eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the scene. "Mr. Bernard," she acknowledged with a respectful nod. "I understand you're enjoying a special dining experience this evening." "Special doesn't begin to describe it," Daniel replied. "Ms. Holloway, I presume? Your timing is impeccable. We were just discussing some staffing matters." Miranda's gaze sharpened. "Staffing matters? It seems," Daniel explained smoothly, "that Chef Moreau initiated a cooking challenge with Ms. Jenkins, who, until today, has been working as a janitor in your establishment. He wagered his position against her continued employment, and..." He gestured to the plates. The results speak for themselves. Miranda's professional mask slipped momentarily as she processed this information. Chef Moreau did what? Jacques straightened, attempting to regain authority. Ms. Holloway, this is being blown entirely out of proportion. A simple kitchen joke. Joke? Laurent interrupted, surprising everyone. The usually quiet sous chef stepped forward. You announced the terms in front of the entire kitchen staff, chef. You said, and I quote, I'll bet my position on it. Miranda's expression darkened further. Jacques, we need to speak privately. Immediately. Before you go. Daniel interjected. You should know that I'll be featuring Ms. Jenkins and her exceptional cuisine in next month's issue of Culinary Elite. He let the significance of this sink in. Naturally, I'll be discussing the circumstances of her discovery as well. The implications weren't lost on Miranda Holloway. A positive feature in the industry's most prestigious publication could drive bookings for months. Conversely, a story about their executive chef publicly humiliating a black female employee, then attempting to renege on his wager when he lost, could be devastating. Ms. Jenkins. Miranda turned to Loretta, her tone considerably warmer. I think we should also have a conversation. At your convenience, of course. Jacques made one final desperate attempt. Miranda, you can't possibly be considering. She has no formal training. No credentials. The board would never. The board, Miranda interrupted coldly, is primarily concerned with the hotel's reputation and profitability, both of which now seem inextricably linked to Ms. Jenkins. She turned back to Loretta. Would tomorrow morning be convenient for our discussion? Loretta, still stunned by the rapid turn of events, nodded silently. Excellent. Miranda fixed Jacques with a glacial stare. My office. Now. As they departed, Jacques cast one last venomous glance at Loretta, all pretense of professional courtesy abandoned, his eyes burning with the humiliation of a man who had orchestrated his own downfall through arrogance. When the door closed behind them, Loretta finally exhaled fully for what felt like the first time in hours. She turned to find Daniel Bernard watching her with undisguised admiration. You always could cook circles around everyone, he said softly, the formal food critic momentarily replaced by the neighborhood boy she'd once known. Even back then. I had a good teacher, Loretta replied, her voice steady despite the emotions churning within her. The best, Daniel agreed. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit with me? We have decades to catch up on, and I haven't finished savoring your grandmother's oxtails. As Loretta settled into the chair, the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in. The challenge she'd accepted to defend her grandmother's legacy and her own dignity had somehow transformed into a pivot point for her entire life. Jacques' attempt to humiliate her had backfired spectacularly, exposing not just his culinary limitations but the emptiness of his approach to food, all technique and presentation with no heart or soul. He never stood a chance, did he? She asked quietly. Daniel shook his head, taking another bite of her dish. Not against this. You can teach technique, Loretta. You can memorize recipes and practice presentations. But this, he pointed to her food with his fork. This comes from someplace deeper. This is heritage, memory, and love made edible. He smiled, the years falling away. This is Estelle Jenkins still teaching us all how it's done. Outside in the hallway, they could hear Jacques' raised voice from Miranda's distant office, followed by the general manager's cooler tones. The executive chef's reign at Maison du Soleil was ending, not with applause but with desperate justifications that convinced no one, least of all himself. Loretta Jenkins, who had arrived at work that morning as a janitor, would leave as something entirely different. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both opportunity and challenge, but for the first time in years, it was also filled with possibility. And through it all, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice. See, child? They always respect what you can do. 1 week after the kitchen challenge, Loretta stood at the entrance of Maison du Soleil's gleaming kitchen, feeling like an imposter despite the crisp new chef's coat she wore. The jacket was perfectly tailored, weighted with the significance of its 3 embroidered stars and the elegant script that read, "Executive Chef Loretta Jenkins," across the breast. The kitchen fell silent as she entered. Faces turned toward her, some curious, some wary, a few openly pleased. This was her domain now, a transformation so sudden and complete it still felt dreamlike. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "I know this is a change for all of us." Laurent, the senior sous chef who had confirmed Jacques' wager, stepped forward. "Welcome, Chef Jenkins." His use of her new title sent a ripple through the assembled staff. "We're ready for your direction." The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. Jacques Moreau had departed in a storm of recriminations and threats, though these had quieted considerably after Miranda Holloway reminded him of certain non-disparagement clauses in his contract. The hotel's board had initially balked at replacing their celebrity chef with a woman who had been cleaning their floors just days earlier, until Daniel Bernard's preliminary article appeared online, generating a flood of reservation requests specifically asking for the janitor chef's cuisine. "Before we begin today's service preparations," Loretta said, "I'd like to share my vision for our kitchen moving forward." She moved to the center island, where just days ago Jacques had stood mocking her grandmother's teachings. The symmetry wasn't lost on her, but there was no room for pettiness in what she planned to build. "Maison du Soleil has always represented luxury and excellence," she began. "That won't change. But true luxury isn't just about expensive ingredients or elaborate presentations. It's about transcendent experiences, food that nourishes both body and spirit." Several of the younger chefs exchanged glances, unsure what to make of this philosophical approach. "Our menu will evolve," Loretta continued, noting their uncertainty. "We'll honor classical techniques while introducing elements from diverse culinary traditions. Every dish must tell a story and create a connection." She smiled slightly. "And yes, we'll keep the truffles and the gold leaf for those who expect them, but they'll need to earn their place on the plate by enhancing flavor, not just appearance." Marcus, the young sous chef who had slipped her a better knife during the challenge, raised his hand tentatively. "Will we still be a French restaurant?" "We'll be a great restaurant," Loretta replied simply. "With roots in French cuisine but branches that reach much further. I spent yesterday reviewing our supplier list." She picked up a folder from the counter. "We'll maintain our relationships with premium vendors, but we're also going to forge connections with local farmers, particularly those from underrepresented communities." Laurent nodded approvingly. Jacques always refused to consider local producers. Too inconsistent, he claimed. "Building those relationships takes work," Loretta acknowledged. "But the reward is ingredients with character and a story, and a stronger community around us." She took a breath before continuing to her most significant announcement. "I'm also creating an apprenticeship program. 4 positions to start, prioritizing talented individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds who might not have access to formal culinary education." This caused a stir among the staff. Maison du Soleil had traditionally only hired graduates from the most prestigious cooking schools. "My grandmother taught me that knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted," Loretta explained. "Many of you have trained at the finest academies in the world. I'm asking you to share that training with those who haven't had the same opportunities." She let her gaze travel around the kitchen, meeting each pair of eyes directly. "In return, these apprentices will bring perspectives and traditions that will enrich our collective culinary vocabulary. When different cooking traditions meet and merge, magic happens." The silence that followed wasn't hostile but thoughtful, professionals considering a new approach to their craft. Finally, Laurent spoke. "When do these changes begin?" "Today," Loretta smiled. "The hotel has given me full creative control of the menu, starting immediately." Ms. Holloway was particularly persuaded by the advance reservations that have come in since Mr. Bernard's preliminary article. As if summoned by her words, the kitchen doors swung open and Daniel Bernard entered, dressed impeccably but with a camera around his neck instead of a critic's notebook. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said with a warm smile. "I wanted to catch Chef Jenkins' first day for the feature." The staff straightened at the presence of the renowned critic, but Loretta merely returned his smile. Their reconnection had been one of the most unexpected gifts of this entire experience, a friendship rekindled across decades, bringing with it not just professional opportunity but a sense of coming full circle. "Perfect timing," she replied. "We were just discussing our new direction." She turned back to her staff. "Today we'll serve the existing menu. Our guests have specific expectations. But I want each of you to begin thinking about a dish that represents your own culinary heritage, something passed down through your family or culture that could be elevated to fine dining standards without losing its soul." The energy in the kitchen shifted palpably, excitement replacing uncertainty as chefs began mentally cataloging recipes from their childhood homes in Vietnam, Mexico, Italy, and beyond. "1 week from today," Loretta continued, "we'll have a special tasting where each of you presents your dish. The best will become part of our new signature menu, with full credit to its creator." As the staff dispersed to their stations with renewed purpose, Daniel approached Loretta. "You're transforming more than a menu," he observed quietly. "You're changing the entire culture." "Just paying forward what my grandmother taught me," Loretta replied. "Food should build bridges, not walls." Daniel smiled. "Estelle would be proud. Not just of your cooking, but of how you've handled this sudden success, with grace and vision rather than ego." Before she could respond, the kitchen doors swung open again. The maitre d' appeared, looking slightly flustered. "Chef Jenkins," he began, still getting used to addressing the former janitor by this title. "We have a situation. There's a party of 8 who've just arrived, food critics from major publications across the country. They've requested to speak with you before ordering." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Word travels fast in our circle. They're here to see if the hype is justified." Loretta took a deep breath, straightened her chef's coat, and nodded. "Show them to the private dining room. I'll be there momentarily." As the maitre d' departed, she turned back to her kitchen, where the staff waited expectantly for direction. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice now carrying the quiet authority of someone who had found her rightful place. "We have critics dining with us tonight. Let's show them what happens when tradition meets innovation, when technique serves heart, and when food becomes more than just sustenance." She picked up a knife, not the dull one Jacques had left her, but a properly sharpened chef's knife that now bore her initials on the handle, a gift from the hotel board with their official confirmation of her position. "Order in!" called Laurent from the front station, and the kitchen burst into coordinated movement. Loretta smiled as she took her position at the center island. The path ahead would hold challenges, certainly, skeptics to convince, traditions to respectfully reimagine, a reputation to build beyond the initial splash of publicity. But for the first time in years, she felt wholly herself, a chef honoring her grandmother's legacy while creating her own. As she began preparing the evening's first dish, the kitchen around her humming with purpose and possibility, Loretta thought of the photograph tucked in her grandmother's cookbook, a little girl and boy standing proudly behind a makeshift grill, unaware of how their paths would diverge only to reconnect decades later in this very kitchen. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered as she worked, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had finally found her way home.